You were never meant to die. That was the first and greatest deception, taught to you before you were even old enough to question it. You were led to believe that this life, this fleeting moment wrapped in skin and bone, was all there is. That when the body breaks down, your story ends. That death is final, and anything beyond it is mere fantasy, faith, or fear. But what if that's not true? What if the real truth was hidden, not because it was lost, but because it was too powerful to be allowed in your hands? Ancient civilizations didn't fear death. They understood it. They studied it, transcended it, and encoded what they learned into structures that still stand, symbols that still whisper, and texts that still breathe with power. Atlantis, Thoth, the Emerald Tablets. These aren't myths. They are remnants of a forgotten science, a roadmap to immortality that's been buried beneath centuries of lies. And now, it's time to uncover it. Long before our recorded history, before the first empires, before even the pyramids cast their shadows across the desert, there was a civilization whose knowledge eclipsed ours in ways we can hardly imagine. Atlantis wasn't just a city of myth, it was a hub of profound spiritual science. The Atlanteans didn't simply build temples, they built resonant structures designed to interact with consciousness itself. They weren't guessing about the afterlife, they mapped it. They weren't worshipping gods out of fear. They were working with universal laws to master their existence beyond the body. Atlantean wisdom was not based on superstition. It was systematic, exact, and initiated only to those prepared to wield it. These weren't tales told around fires. They were encoded truths passed through sacred geometry, crystal resonance, and vibrational hieroglyphs. The highest initiates of Atlantis believed that immortality wasn't a fantasy but a skill. Death, to them, wasn't a tragic ending but a veil, thin, penetrable, and often crossed with full awareness. They trained to leave their bodies consciously, to retain their memory through lifetimes, to reincarnate with intent rather than by default. The problem wasn't that this knowledge was lost. It was hidden, deliberately. As Atlantis fell, whether through cataclysm or sabotage, the priest-kings and initiates scattered, preserving fragments of their wisdom in the architecture of the earth itself. That's why the same motifs appear in cultures oceans apart. That's why pyramids rise in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and even China. These structures were never tombs. They were libraries carved in stone, initiatory chambers meant to alter consciousness, activate the energy body, and initiate seekers into deathless states of awareness. But ask yourself, why has mainstream history worked so hard to keep Atlantis labeled as myth? Why is anyone who speaks of Thoth, Hermeticism, or vibrational medicine mocked or dismissed? Because once you understand that death is a transition and not a termination, you can no longer be controlled through fear. And fear is the leash that keeps modern society in line. The moment you realize you are not your body, that consciousness survives the grave and can evolve beyond it. The systems built on control begin to collapse. You stop living in fear. You stop obeying blindly. You stop accepting the boundaries they drew for you. Some of the deepest teachings on vibrational immortality are too controversial to share here. Join our free newsletter, Insights Academy, through the link below and receive the Kybalion ebook for a limited time only. The Atlanteans weren't just engineers of stone, they were engineers of the soul. They aligned their lives with natural harmonics. They used sound, light, and intention to elevate consciousness beyond decay. They believed the body was a temple, yes, but also a tool, a temporary vessel for the soul's eternal journey. And they left us the blueprint, encoded in symbols, myths, and structures that modern science still struggles to decipher. The fall of Atlantis didn't mark the end of this wisdom. It marked the beginning of its concealment. When we speak of Atlantis today, most people still picture a lost island, swallowed by the sea. But the real Atlantis never died. It moved underground, into secret societies, into hidden texts, into the memory of the soul. You carry echoes of it in your intuition, in the moments where you feel there's something more, something ancient, something you once knew but can't quite recall. That's not imagination, that's remembrance. You've been taught to look at death as a deadline. The Atlanteans saw it as a doorway. And if you can remember what they knew, if you can lift the veil and see the blueprint they left behind, then maybe death isn't something to fear. Maybe, just maybe, it's something you can master. In the ancient halls of wisdom, one name echoes louder than most: Thoth. To some, he was a god. To others, a man. But those who truly study his teachings know him as something far greater. An immortal intelligence who walked among mortals, mastered the illusion of death, and left behind a roadmap for those ready to escape the cycle of rebirth. Thoth wasn't bound by a single name or form. In Kemet, he was the god of writing and wisdom. In Greece, he became Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. In the hidden texts of mystics and magicians, he is the architect behind the arcane, guardian of sacred laws that govern not just the physical world, but the realms beyond it. His legacy is not made of myth, but of mastery. The emerald tablets, attributed to Thoth, do not read like religious doctrine or moral allegory. They are coded instructions, encrypted guides to the soul's journey through time, space, and transformation. Thoth claimed he lived for thousands of years, moving through different incarnations by will, not chance. He spoke of stepping outside the body like shedding old clothes, of traveling between planes, of returning to guide humanity again and again. These are not the ramblings of a deluded man, but the confessions of someone who understood the deeper mechanics of existence. In his writings, Thoth doesn't ask for worship. He demands understanding. He doesn't speak of salvation. He speaks of alignment, with frequency, with law, with the divine structure underpinning all things. To him, immortality wasn't about clinging to life. It was about transcending the illusion of death altogether. He writes, "Man is a flame bound to a mountain, but that flame can rise. You are not your body. You are not your name. You are awareness, temporarily condensed into form. And the moment you realize this, death loses its grip." Thoth laid out 7 laws, later known as the Hermetic Principles, that form the architecture of reality itself: mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender. These aren't philosophical fluff. They are tools. Once internalized, they begin to lift the veil between the seen and unseen. And when you master the law of vibration, especially, you begin to feel what the Atlanteans knew to be true. Your frequency determines your reality, your level of awareness, and your ability to move between planes of existence. Raise the frequency, and death becomes a door, not a wall. But here's what modern society has done. It's stripped Thoth's wisdom down to trivia. His symbols are placed on fashion items, his name reduced to Instagram quotes, and his teachings dismissed by scholars who've never even read him. This is no accident. When truth becomes a trend, it loses its power. That's the point. Keep the truth in plain sight, but bury it beneath a sea of noise. And the emerald tablets? They weren't written for academics or the spiritually curious. They were written for initiates, those ready to stop believing and start knowing. Imagine for a moment that everything you've been taught about death is wrong, that the soul is not judged or erased, but simply moves, guided by what it has remembered and what it has yet to learn. Imagine that you could move with intention, not just drift. Imagine that you could choose when to return, or whether to return at all. That's the reality Thoth presents. Not heaven or hell, not reward or punishment, just consciousness evolving, choosing, remembering, and that changes everything. Because once you realize that you are more than flesh, that you have lived before and will live again not by fate, but by design, you begin to take your life more seriously. You begin to live with purpose. You begin to ask deeper questions. What am I here to remember? What part of the great law have I come to master? And most of all, how can I free myself from the wheel of repetition and enter the current of eternity? Thoth never said the path would be easy, but he said, it is possible. And for those who seek, not with blind faith, but with disciplined awareness, the journey doesn't end at death. It begins there. If Thoth taught one thing above all else, it was this: everything is vibration. The universe isn't made of matter, it's made of frequency. The world around you, the thoughts in your head, the emotions that rise in your chest, they're all vibrational patterns. When Thoth said, "As above, so below, as within, so without," he wasn't offering a poetic phrase. He was giving you the key to the fabric of reality. Because once you understand that everything is energy vibrating at different speeds, you begin to see death not as an ending but as a shift in wavelength. You've been conditioned to view your body as solid, your life as linear, and your death as final. But those are illusions, tricks of perception created by low-frequency awareness. Science already knows that nothing is truly solid. Matter is just energy condensed into a form we can interact with. What you perceive as physical is simply your consciousness interacting with certain frequencies. Change the frequency, and the form disappears, or transforms. That's not mysticism. That's quantum physics. Thoth knew this long before we gave it names. He spoke of moving through dimensions, of accessing the flame of life that burns unseen, of stepping beyond time by attuning oneself to higher vibrations. He didn't fear death because he understood how to bypass it, not by avoiding it, but by tuning his consciousness beyond its reach. Just like tuning a radio from one station to another, he moved through planes by changing his frequency. Imagine if your consciousness is a song, unique in rhythm, tone, and resonance. Now imagine that song isn't stuck on repeat in this physical reality, but capable of being played in infinite octaves across time and space. The only barrier between you and higher realms is your ability to tune into them. This is what Thoth meant when he wrote that immortality belongs to those who rise in vibration. Immortality isn't the body living forever. It's the self, your true essence, ascending to a state where death has no dominion. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's practical, powerful, and real. You raise your frequency through what you think, feel, consume, create, and believe. Your choices, what you watch, what you speak, what you accept, either trap you in dense frequencies or liberate you into lighter ones. The food you eat has a frequency. The music you listen to, the conversations you keep, the environments you dwell in, everything either lifts you or lowers you. And most people, unknowingly, spend their lives tuned to the static of fear, anger, distraction, and ego. That's the frequency of decay, the frequency of death. But shift your awareness to love, truth, stillness, and inner knowing, and you begin to rise. That's when things start to change. Not overnight, and not with one meditation, but gradually, subtly, powerfully. You become less reactive. You begin to see through manipulation. You feel energy differently. You dream more vividly. You sense when things are off, and when something is calling you forward. That's not a spiritual side effect, it's a frequency shift. And when that shift becomes sustained, your soul begins to remember how to move beyond the limits of this world. Thoth didn't just tell us this, he encoded it into every layer of his teachings. The 7 Hermetic principles are vibrational laws. The emerald tablets are vibrational maps. Even the ancient symbols, like the ankh, the eye, the spiral, are vibrational keys meant to trigger awareness in the subconscious. They aren't decorations, they're frequency tools. And yet, modern life keeps you vibrating low. Stress, processed food, constant screen stimulation, fear-based news, societal shame, it's all designed to keep you anchored in survival mode. Because someone vibrating in fear is predictable, malleable, controllable, but someone vibrating in awareness, they become dangerous to the system. Because when you're no longer afraid of death, you're no longer afraid to live. You take risks. You speak the truth. You walk a different path. You step outside the frequency of conformity and into the current of conscious creation. That's what immortality really means. Not living forever in a shell that ages and breaks down, but rising into a state of being where your essence, your awareness, your soul becomes untouchable. That's what Thoth achieved. And that's what you've been kept from remembering. Because the moment you do, you're no longer a cog in someone else's machine. You become the architect of your own reality. You've been taught to fear death because you've been taught to believe you are your body. From the moment you're born, everything in society reinforces the illusion that the physical is all that's real. Your value is tied to how you look, what you own, and how much time you have left. Life becomes a countdown. But the truth is, your body is not your identity. It's your interface. It's the suit you wear in this dimension, a vessel for experience, but never the full story of who you are. Strip away the layers, skin, bone, brain, even name, and what remains is consciousness, awareness, energy. And energy doesn't die, it transforms. Thoth understood this thousands of years ago, and he wasn't alone. The mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and even early Asia all pointed to the same truth. The soul is eternal. It is light condensed into form, and when the form dissolves, the light continues. It carries memory, intent, and evolution. You don't just fade into nothingness when you die, you shift. Like steam turning to mist, your essence lifts from the body and moves beyond the material field. The only question is, are you doing it consciously? That's what separates the awakened from the wandering. Most people die in confusion, still clinging to their identities, their regrets, their unresolved desires. And so, they drift, caught in the lower realms of frequency, repeating lifetimes without memory, recycling lessons, until something finally breaks through. But those who walk the path of remembrance, who raise their vibration and live aligned with the deeper laws, they move with purpose. They step out of the body like a well-worn cloak and walk through the next veil with full awareness of who they are and why they're here. That's what Thoth did. That's what the initiates trained for. And that's what you were never meant to know. Modern culture has sterilized death, turned it into a clinical event, locked behind hospital curtains and silent mourning. But the ancients saw it differently. Death wasn't an end. It was an initiation, a test of frequency. If your vibration matched the higher realms, you would ascend. If not, you returned. Not as punishment, but as a necessity. The soul is not judged in the way you've been told. It evaluates itself. It knows when it's ready and when it's not. And the soul is honest, brutally so. That's why spiritual bypassing doesn't work. You can fake knowledge with your words, but not with your energy. The soul records everything, and when the body falls away, the soul becomes all that's left. You've felt this, even if you couldn't name it. That sense of being more than what you see in the mirror. That feeling that your life didn't begin with your first breath. The dreams that feel like memories. The instincts that don't make sense. The pain you carry that wasn't born in this life, these are echoes of your eternal self. You don't remember because you were taught not to. But memory lives in vibration. Raise your frequency, and you begin to recall. The soul doesn't measure time in years. It measures in growth, in alignment, in integration. When you suppress your truth, it slows. When you align with it, it expands. You've been taught to value productivity, but your soul values presence. You've been told to chase security, but your soul thrives on evolution. And you've been conditioned to fear the unknown, but your soul was born from it. The very thing you're scared of, death, is something your soul already understands. Thoth taught that death is a mirror. It shows you what you really are. If you've spent your life identifying with the external, death will feel like loss. But if you've built your life around the internal, death will feel like a return. Not a disappearance, but a homecoming. The truth is, the body will always break. That's the nature of form. But the soul is fire. It only goes out if you forget how to tend it. So don't let them convince you that death is the enemy. And don't let them reduce your existence to a number on a birth certificate or a plot in the ground. You are energy, eternal, intelligent, evolving. And the moment you stop living like a body with a soul and start living like a soul with a body, everything begins to change. We were told the pyramids were tombs, built by slave labor. erected as grand burial chambers for kings obsessed with their own legacy. But that's a lie. There's not a single body that's ever been found inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. No inscriptions, no sarcophagi that fit the story, no decoration like in other tombs. Just resonance, geometry, and a silence that speaks more loudly than any textbook explanation ever could. Because the pyramids weren't built for death, they were built for awakening. These structures weren't about honoring the dead. They were designed for the living, for those ready to transcend the limitations of flesh. The Great Pyramid isn't just a marvel of architecture. It's a vibrational instrument. Its proportions match the golden ratio. Its alignment to the stars is precise down to fractions of degrees. The materials used, the angles, the chambers, all of it forms a system of energetic activation. This wasn't primitive guesswork. It was spiritual engineering. Thoth, often credited with the design of the pyramids, understood that architecture wasn't just about shelter, it was about frequency. The pyramid's internal chambers correspond to the stages of the initiate's journey. The descending passage, dark and narrow, represents the descent into the unconscious, the death of the false self. The Queen's chamber symbolizes the heart, the seat of intuitive knowing. And the King's chamber, sitting in perfect resonance with Earth's natural frequency, is where transformation happens, where the initiate, aligned in body, mind, and spirit, undergoes a vibrational rebirth. Initiates didn't enter the pyramid to die. They entered to remember. They fasted, meditated, vibrated mantras, and aligned their bodies to the geometry of the structure, allowing their consciousness to rise. This wasn't symbolic. It was literal. The pyramid was a tool, just like a tuning fork, just like a mirror, just like a doorway. And when used properly, it could shift the soul into higher states of awareness where physical limitation no longer applied. What Thoth built wasn't a monument. It was a frequency portal, and that's why its true function has been buried under myths and lies. Because if people knew they had the power to shift their vibration and access expanded states of being, if they knew they didn't need intermediaries, temples, or doctrines, they'd stop obeying. They'd stop fearing death. They'd stop living in survival mode and start remembering that they were born to transcend. That's dangerous knowledge. It destabilizes the systems that profit off your limitation. Look closer at the pyramid's placement. It sits at the center of Earth's landmass. Its height, multiplied by a specific constant, gives you the polar radius of the planet. Its base, divided correctly, encodes the speed of light. These aren't coincidences. They're messages, embedded in stone, defying time, waiting for those ready to listen. It's not just a building, it's a code pointing toward a science that has nothing to do with bricks and everything to do with consciousness. And this code wasn't just built in Giza. Variations of it appear across the globe. The stepped pyramids of Mesoamerica, the mounds of North America, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, all share geometric and energetic similarities. All point skyward. All are aligned to solstices, stars, and cycles. What we call myths are fragments of a larger truth, a truth whispered across continents by those who remembered. But today, most walk past these structures without a second thought, eyes glazed over, ears deaf to the resonance beneath their feet, because they've been taught these are relics, not tools. Artifacts, not instruments. History, not prophecy. But what if you remembered what they're for? What if, instead of standing in awe of ancient genius, you began to ask the real question, what happens when I align with the code? The answer isn't found in books or plaques or documentaries. It's found in vibration, in silence, in the stillness between your thoughts, in the rhythm of your breath as it mirrors the pulse of the earth. When you learn to listen like the initiates did, when you stop looking at pyramids and start feeling them, you'll realize they weren't just made of stone, they were made of intention. And intention is everything. You don't need to travel to Giza to remember who you are. You just need to start recognizing that what was once carved in limestone was meant to be reawakened in your spirit. Because the pyramid isn't just a shape. It's a symbol of your own becoming, base rooted in matter, point piercing the heavens. And when you rise like it, you don't reach for immortality. You remember it was always yours. If this knowledge is so powerful, so transformative, then why don't we learn about it in school? Why aren't the emerald tablets taught in philosophy classes? Why are the pyramids still described as tombs when the evidence says otherwise? Because the truth isn't missing. It's been buried on purpose. Not lost, but locked away. Hidden in plain sight, behind the polished mirrors of modern history, institutional religion, and academic dogma. Because a humanity that remembers its immortality is a humanity that can't be controlled. The deeper you look, the more obvious it becomes. Across every major system, education, religion, media, science, the same pattern emerges. They don't want you to ask certain questions. They want you to believe the physical world is all there is, that you're just a body, that life is a struggle, and death is the end. Why? Because fear makes people obedient. It makes them chase comfort instead of truth. It keeps them small. A soul that fears death will cling to authority. A soul that remembers its eternity can't be manipulated. For centuries, the teachings of Thoth and the secrets of Atlantis were passed down in mystery schools, guarded by initiates, encoded in symbols, disguised in stories. Not because the knowledge was dangerous in itself, but because the world had become dangerous to those who held it. Empires rose by keeping their subjects in spiritual darkness. The church silenced mystics. Scholars mocked the esoteric. Secret societies were hunted, infiltrated, and corrupted. And slowly, generation by generation, the immortal flame was dimmed, but it was never extinguished. It survived in fragments, in symbols carved above cathedral doors, in parables misunderstood, in rituals passed down by those who remembered in whispers. Even in modern spiritual circles, traces of it remain, though diluted and scattered. You see it in yoga that was once a path to enlightenment but now sells leggings. You see it in meditation apps that offer calm but not liberation. The sacred has been commercialized, sterilized, and packaged for mass consumption. Because when you commodify truth, you take away its fire. And still, the system isn't satisfied. The institutions that govern your perception work overtime to drown out anything that challenges their control. Openly speak about Atlantis, and you're labeled a fantasist. Talk about vibrational consciousness, and you're written off as pseudoscience. But those labels are just walls, cheap ones at that. Because when you read between the lines, when you listen not to what they tell you, but what they refuse to speak on, that's where the real story begins. The story of a humanity that once knew how to transcend death and was told to forget. The suppression goes beyond information. It extends into how you live, how you think, how you dream. You're taught to ridicule ancient wisdom while blindly trusting the institutions that profit from your fear. You're encouraged to worship technology, not intuition. To measure success in numbers, not alignment. To fear aging, rather than honoring it as preparation for transcendence. This is not evolution, it's entrapment, and it's been perfected over generations, but the cracks are showing. People are waking up, not because they're being told to, but because they're remembering. Something deep within is stirring, asking questions louder than the answers they were given. Something ancient, something sacred, something Atlantean, and the moment that spark lights, the system starts to lose its grip, because a single awakened soul can set fire to 1,000 asleep. If you've ever felt like you didn't fit in this world, like you were born with a memory you couldn't explain, like you were meant to do more than just exist until you die, it's not a glitch. It's your soul resisting the program. The truth doesn't need to be taught. It needs to be recalled. The emerald flame still burns. The path is still open, but only if you're willing to walk away from everything that kept you comfortable in the dark. This isn't about rejecting science or abandoning reason. It's about integrating what the ancients knew with what we're rediscovering. Consciousness is the final frontier, not outer space, not artificial intelligence. You are the technology. You are the code. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner the veil starts to lift. So ask yourself, who profits when you forget who you are? And who do you become when you finally remember? You were never meant to be ordinary. You weren't born to repeat someone else's life, follow someone else's rules, or believe someone else's version of reality. Deep down, you've always known it. That quiet pull inside you, the feeling that you're here for something more. It's not wishful thinking. It's your soul remembering the path of the initiate, the ancient path that calls not to the masses, but to the few who are ready to remember what most have forgotten, that you are not just a human being, you are a divine intelligence having a human experience. The teachings of Thoth, of Atlantis, of every true spiritual lineage across time all echo the same truth. Immortality is not a destination, it's a state of being. It's not about avoiding death, it's about stepping beyond it while still alive. The initiate doesn't wait for death to teach them what's real. They train for it. They prepare, not with fear but with reverence, because death to them is not a thief, it's a doorway, and only those with the right frequency can walk through it consciously. You don't raise your vibration through trendy mantras or surface-level affirmations. You do it by aligning your entire life to truth. That means dismantling the false self, the part of you built from fear, comparison, shame, and survival. It means becoming ruthlessly honest about your energy, your beliefs, your habits. Are they yours, or were they handed to you by a system designed to keep you distracted and obedient? The path of the initiate is not about perfection, it's about integrity. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every choice you make, it either aligns you with your higher nature or pulls you back into density. This is what ancient initiation was truly about. It wasn't pageantry. It wasn't a performance. It was transformation through fire. The fire of inner truth, of shadow work, of facing the parts of yourself you were taught to suppress. The initiate had to die before they died, so that when the body finally did fall away, the soul didn't panic. It remembered. And because it remembered, it didn't wander. It chose. That's what makes immortality possible. Not bypassing the laws of life, but mastering them. And it's not just about where you go when you die. It's about who you become while you live. When you walk this path, your presence shifts. Your energy changes rooms before you speak. You become less reactive, less programmable. You begin to hear the subtle currents of truth behind people's words, behind the media, behind the noise. Your intuition sharpens. You start having dreams that feel more real than waking life. You notice synchronicities, not as coincidence, but as communication. You become the bridge between the seen and unseen. And people notice, even if they can't explain why. But this path is not glamorous. It is not easy. It will break you open. It will strip you down. It will demand that you leave behind everything you once used to define yourself. But in that shedding, something sacred is revealed. Not something new, but something ancient. Something you carried before this lifetime. Something that kept whispering in your quietest moments. That you are divine. That you are eternal. That you are here not to survive, but to awaken. The initiate doesn't escape life. They enter it fully, eyes open, heart clear, spirit steady. They know their body is a vehicle, their mind a tool, and their soul the true navigator. They stop chasing purpose outside themselves and begin to embody it. Because the purpose isn't out there, it's in how you live, how you love, how you choose truth over comfort time and time again. And this isn't reserved for sages in robes or mystics in temples. It's for you, right here, right now. Every moment is a test. Every decision is a doorway. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be willing. Willing to listen. Willing to question. Willing to rise. The path of the initiate was never closed. It was simply forgotten. But now that you've found it again, the only question is, will you walk it? Something is stirring. You can feel it. People everywhere are beginning to question the scripts they were handed. They're looking deeper, listening more carefully, trusting their intuition over institutions. The veil that kept this knowledge hidden is thinning, not because a few discovered it, but because many are remembering it. And when enough souls remember together, something ancient begins to reawaken. This isn't just a personal journey, it's a collective return. A return to the Atlantean mind, the state of being where technology, spirituality, and consciousness existed not in opposition, but in harmony. You're not the only one who's felt like this world doesn't make sense, like the systems are broken, like the answers you've been given don't satisfy the questions you're really asking. That discomfort, that sense of disconnection, it's the sign of a deeper intelligence resurfacing. You're not confused, you're being called to break the trance, called to realign, called to remember the blueprint humanity once lived by, before the fall, before the manipulation, before the silence. This is how the Atlantean age began, not with control, but with consciousness. Their society wasn't perfect, but it was built on principles we've abandoned. They knew the body was sacred, that vibration could heal, that intention could shape reality. They honored the cycles of nature, built with sacred geometry, and trained their minds to interface with higher realms. That's not fantasy, it's ancient memory. It's a time when the veil between spirit and science was thin, when the soul was seen as sovereign, and immortality wasn't a myth, but a method. That memory lives in your cells, in your dreams, in the flash of recognition you feel when you read something that bypasses logic and lands straight in your knowing. That's not nostalgia, that's remembrance. You don't need to reconstruct Atlantis in stone. You need to rebuild it in consciousness. Because Atlantis was never just a place. It was a frequency, a way of being, a state of alignment where humanity operated in harmony with itself and the cosmos. And it's returning, not as history repeating, but as wisdom re-emerging. You can see it already. People leaving behind lives that no longer fit, choosing healing over hustling, searching for teachers who don't demand worship, but invite empowerment, creating communities, not around dogma, but around awareness. We are rediscovering what it means to live in resonance. And resonance is the language of the soul. This shift won't be broadcast on the news. It won't be announced by governments or validated by institutions. It will happen quietly, but powerfully, in conversations, in choices, in the unseen ripples of energy exchanged between awakened hearts. That's how the Atlantean mind spreads, not by force, but by frequency. You're not here to convince the world. You're here to become a living example of what's possible when you remember who you are. As more of us step into this truth, the illusion begins to fracture. The structures built on fear start to crumble, not through war, but through irrelevance. What once held power over you begins to dissolve when you no longer resonate with it. And when that happens across millions of minds, the collective frequency shifts. That's how timelines change. That's how paradigms collapse. Not with noise, but with knowing. You were never alone in your remembering. The very fact that you're here, drawn to these ideas, pulled toward these forgotten truths, is proof that something within you is synchronizing with the collective awakening. This is what the ancients prophesied, not the end of the world, but the end of the illusion. And beyond the illusion lies the truth that you are energy, eternal and evolving. The truth that death is a veil, not a verdict. The truth that immortality is not a fantasy, but your birthright, if you choose to remember it. You don't need to shout. You don't need to fight. You just need to be, fully, unapologetically, authentically. The more you embody truth, the more you create space for others to do the same. And when enough of us hold that frequency, the world changes, not because we forced it, but because we remembered how. They told you immortality was a fantasy, that eternal life belonged only in myths or fairy tales, that death was the ultimate boundary, the final truth, the one thing no one escapes. But what they didn't tell you is that immortality isn't about running from death, it's about reclaiming your power over it. You don't need to live forever in a body to become immortal. You just need to stop identifying with what dies. The real you, the soul, the essence, the field of awareness behind your thoughts. was never born, and it will never end. It only shifts, expands, remembers. What separates the mortal from the immortal isn't biology, it's awareness. Most people live and die without ever realizing who they are. They drift through life, reacting, obeying, surviving, trapped in roles they didn't choose and beliefs they never questioned. But those who wake up, those who remember, they begin to live differently. They stop being afraid. They start to see death, not as a shadow, but as a mirror, not as a thief, but as a teacher. They realize that true immortality isn't about escaping the cycle of life and death. It's about mastering it. This mastery doesn't come through denial or avoidance. It comes through alignment. You align your thoughts, your actions, your vibration with the truth of who you are. You stop chasing validation, possessions, and status, and start cultivating presence, integrity, and frequency. You begin to live from the soul outward, not the ego inward. And as you do, something begins to shift. You remember that you were never here to fit in, perform, or accumulate. You were here to evolve, to express, to embody a higher knowing that goes beyond language and logic. Thoth didn't promise a life without struggle. He promised a life of remembrance. And when you remember your divine nature, when you walk the path of the initiate, you change the way death touches you. You meet it with open eyes. You know that what awaits on the other side isn't judgment or oblivion, but continuation, expansion, a new chapter in an infinite book. And that knowing changes everything. You stop fearing the end, so you stop wasting your beginning. You speak your truth because you no longer fear rejection. You take risks because you're not obsessed with safety. You choose authenticity over approval, growth over comfort, and alignment over applause. You live not to survive, but to expand. That's what immortality really looks like. Not an escape from death, but a full, fearless embrace of life. The knowledge has always been here, hidden in temples, encoded in symbols, whispered in dreams, preserved by initiates, buried by empires, rediscovered by seekers. And now, it's in your hands. You can choose to forget it, or you can choose to live it. If you've made it this far, don't stop here. Sign up to our free newsletter, Insights Academy, in the description below. Some truths are too powerful for this platform. And yes, you'll also get a copy of the Kybalion while it's still available. You already carry the code within you. You don't need permission. You don't need to wait. The soul doesn't work on deadlines. It works on resonance. When it hears the truth, it knows. And if yours knows right now, then it's time, not to believe, but to become. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting. I understood it.